What's up, bros? Welcome to another Brograph tutorial. I'm Dave Koss, and today we're going to talk about Octane texturing. And this is kind of an intro to Octane texturing. If you've never done it before, it's kind of a missing manual, which I don't really like calling it that per se. I mean, I like to look at their manual and think that it's a good manual. It is a good manual. I read the entire thing, and the thing is, though, if you've never used Octane before, sometimes it's nice to have somebody just sit down and show you the basics instead of having to do a lot of reading. It'll kind of get you used to everything. So that's what I'm going to try and do here today. And what I've done is I've brought up this Nintendo that Matt actually made a while back, and it is from Brograph tutorial number 11. And you can find that on brograph.com. And I'm going to actually use this model just for demonstration purposes. You don't have to have it. It's not a necessity to learn this tutorial or anything, because I'm just kind of showing what shaders look like and stuff like that. So if you want to download it and kind of strip the original textures out of it, feel free and you can follow along. So I've got the Nintendo here, and I'm going to apply a base texture, and you probably know what a Nintendo is supposed to look like. So we're going to start with that base plastic texture that you can kind of see here. It's got the light and the dark grays. And so when I've got a new Octane scene open, the first thing that I always do is I go to the live viewer window and I open it up. Now usually I keep it here on another window, but for this, just for recording purposes, I'm keeping it all on one window. And under options, under check geometry, if you're using RC 2.23.2 RC2, actually RC1, RC2, or RC3 right now, you will have a new option here for automatic check geometry, which is something that is really nice to have, so you can see animation of geometry on the fly. It doesn't always come in handy. If you have a really complicated scene, it's going to be sitting there recalculating a lot, and so you might want to turn that off, or just turn off check geometry altogether. But this is simple enough. We can leave this on right now. And the first thing that I do is I make a new HDRI environment, and I just turn on my renderer, and it makes a new sky. And under this tag right here, you can either click here and do an RGB spectrum, which will allow you to pick colored sky, or you can use an image texture. And if you click on image texture, this is real important here. You don't want to ever really use this little button here. You want to always go to C4D Octane image texture when you're loading bitmaps of any kind. Now if you load this up for a sky, it automatically comes up with an image texture. If you click on it, you'll see there's like a default that's in there. I don't really know what that is. There's always an error. So if you click on content browser, you probably won't have this up to begin with. You'll probably just have your basic presets, and if you type HDR, you will get a list of HDRs, and by default what I like to use is HDR9, and if you just drag it down in here, you get a sky, and you can rotate around and you can see what's going on. If you're curious about what cards I'm using for my monitors, my main monitors, I'm using a GTX 760 overclocked, which I'm planning to upgrade to the same as my additional video card, which is my secondary, which is doing most of the calculating here, which is the 980 Ti overclocked, which is super fast and uses way less power. If you're having trouble, first of all, right off the bat, kind of getting around, see how smooth this is? Really smooth. If you have two cards, it's to your advantage to have one card power your monitors and the other one just do Octane stuff. In your settings, you can see here, I've got priority set to, well, I have my 760 set to use priority, and for that priority to be low. And then the other one is not using priority. That's the GPU 0 graphics device. You can see if I uncheck it here, you can see I got 6 gig. It doesn't show both of them for some reason. It shows my 6 gig card right here, but That will allow you to have a little more freedom. You won't have any lag when you're actually navigating viewport. So I've kind of got an almost dedicated card going here, or I could uncheck this and be fully dedicated to just my screens and not have it calculate anything with Octane. So I've got that set, and while we're sitting here, let's look at our basic settings. When you set up a scene, there's a couple things you want to do right off the bat and that I'm going to recommend. Number one, you got 128 samples. Your samples are, you know, how deep it goes into the render calculation. If I bring this way down to like one sample, you'll be able to see it looks super crappy, which is fine though if you just want to kind of navigate around. I kind of stay with 128 by default, because that's usually pretty quick anyway. And my specular depth, I usually keep at 12. My glossy depth, I'm going to keep at 24. And my diffuse at 3. Now, ray epsilon, by default, I like to do 0.0011. And we'll talk more about that later when we bring in some textures. So I've got that all set, and we're going to start with our texturing. So I'm going to create shader, Cinema 4D Octane material. And here's my first material. And let's see, I haven't really dug down deep into how this is set up. I'm assuming that there is a selection tag for different parts of the Nintendo. See, here's the bottom, and we'll come back to that. I'm going to restore selection until I find the top here. And it's very important to actually name your selection tags so that you don't have to go back and rename them later when you're looking through stuff like this. I don't know if the top is actually selected at all. Okay, so it must be just a root base texture. So we'll just put this as a base texture on the Nintendo. And it didn't change much because that is because it's just a default Octane texture. Alright, so I've got this centered up. I have this texture, it's on my entire Nintendo. It's a base texture, and we're going to start going and digging through the different pieces of materials. We're going to start out by talking about float. Float is a 0 to 1 value, and it's basically 0 to 100%, and that's either black or at 1 it's white, and that's what the float is. It's a gray value. This actually will not do anything if your colors are set to anything other than 0. So I'm going to set my colors to 0, and now you'll see that float is a gray value. And this will come in handy a lot, because if you want to do a gray value, instead of sitting here trying to get these the same or typing these in manually all the same to get that exact gray value, you just zero these out. Use your gray value right here. So this is our color. This is how we do basic colors. And that's pretty much all you have to know. Now we have an orange Nintendo. So we're going to get this texture that's right here. It's a gray value. I'm going to do zeros. Now I'm just going to eyeball it. If you wanted to, you could use your color picker. It doesn't really matter. I'm going to make kind of that light gray value. Now this looks a little bit blue. That's just because of the HDR environment. If you wanted to change the environment, you want to do something like take it back to white, you know, you can see what your true color is if you want to go back and forth. Sometimes actually what I like to do is, if I can get this to go back, I don't know if that'll undo. No, it's not going to undo. Fine. All right. Let me put my HDR back in there. I'll show you what I do sometimes in this situation. I like to go back and forth depending on what I'm trying to set up in my model between an HDRI and just a pure white values. And usually all I do is I just duplicate the sky and I just call one white, and then I leave the other one as sky, and I'll have this on white like this. I can turn it off and I can go back to the sky. I can just go back and forth anytime. So right now I actually want to look at my gray value with just pure white so I get this color right, because I want this color to be right and I don't want to be off because I'm looking at blue reflections coming from the sky. So that's about right there. So I'm going to turn off the white and go back to my sky. Now, what's the next thing that you want to do with something like this? Now, you'll notice here, if I bring in this Nintendo, that the top doesn't have as much reflection as the bottom. But it does have some, and there is some specular and stuff like that. So what we're going to do is create... let's see. Let's start out by going to the Basic tab. We're going to make this a glossy texture. And when you do that, you notice what happens here is you can see some reflection. Now you can increase that with your index. On index 1 on your index is going to be perfect mirror. Perfect mirror. It almost looks like that. They make a Nintendo that looked like this. Maybe it was gold. It was like the Zelda version or something. I don't know. Now anything above that value is going to start with no reflection and go all the way up. So if I go to 1.1, it's going to be no reflection. If I go up to 8, it's going to be almost all reflection. It's not mirrored. It's not quite mirrored. It still shows through some of your diffuse. So like if I put some red in here so you can see what's going on. If I go to index 0, it's still going to be mirrored. And if I go to 8, you're still going to be able to see a little bit of that red through here. Something else you can do in your specular, if you want to leave your index at 1, and your specular, if you bring down your specular at that point, then you can see the color as well. We'll get more into the specular stuff later. So I'm going to go to my index, and I'm going to bring it up, I don't know, about, let me look here, we'll see. This might change later, but let's say 2.5 looks about right for reflection. Now, of course, we want to go back to our gray value, take these back to 0. We're using our float as our gray value instead for this top piece. Now, this top over here doesn't have much reflection. In fact, you probably can't see it at all. And so in roughness is where we control the blur of the reflection. We're going to jack that way up. So there we go. So there is reflection technically, but it's just so blurred you can't see it. Now, you can increase your specular, which you may not be able to see in this case. It just depends on the situation. You can increase your specular. Here, I'll do this to show you. I'll take my roughness down. See the specular right here? The specular is the brightness of the reflection. See, right now it's just white because I'm using gray values. It's 0 to 1. Or 0% to 100%. That's black to white. You could also do colors. I could make like a red specular in here, and then you can see what happens is all these reflections are red. But in this case, we're not really relying on any of that because we have like this super high roughness. And that gives us kind of a wide specular that we can use, and that matches this a little bit. Now, this plastic that it's made out of isn't perfectly smooth. If you've ever held a Nintendo, the top part is actually kind of rough. The bottom part might be a little more smooth. So in the bump, we're going to go put some bump in here. And here is how you do noise for your bump. You actually go to Cinema 4D Octane Noise, and you put in some noise. And right off the bat, I really like their noise, by the way. Right off the bat, what you're going to see here is if you click on this square here, it's going to open up the noise. And you got turbulence and stuff like that. I use Perlin all the time. And you usually will bring up your octaves to 10, 11, 12. Got to bring up your omega to the 0.8-ish range, something like that. I'm going to make a really fine bump. Now there's a couple things here. One thing you'll notice is I just kind of applied that base texture to the Nintendo as a UVW map. And most of the time you will want to leave your texture as UVW map. For some reason this did spherical by default, which sometimes that happens to me. You want UVW mapping 100% by 100%. And you can see what happens here is that the tiling is a bit much. So if I go back to the bump, I can actually bring this down, and I can see my bump a little more. The other thing is that you can actually control within your textures your UVW, and this is the reason that you want to most of the time leave your tag itself as UVW 100 by 100. You're going to have the control in here, and it's going to help you when you do things like mixing textures together. There's other options. Sometimes I will go to cubic, or I will go to cylinder mapping, just depending on the situation. I don't think we'll probably get into that today. Maybe we will, just depends on what happens here. But you have this control here for UVW under your bump, and you can actually change the size of your bump. And in this case, just because of how this is happened to be modeled or whatever, UVWs, I'm actually going to go to cubic on here, which is actually kind of rare. And if I go back to my bump, I'm going to reset it so you can see what's going on here. I'm going to hit this button and reset my my render, because if you're changing tags within your render, you're not going to see it change. If you're changing like your offset or your length or your projection in the tag itself, if you're changing your projection within the material itself, nice thing about Octane is you are going to be able to see that right here. That's another advantage of doing it this way. So see, I'm just setting this where I want it now, and I'm getting this really fine bump going. I'm going to up my octaves, up my omega. Got that fine bump going, need a little more. And make these about the same X and Y value here. You can see what's going on. I got that in there. But it's too harsh. Obviously, there's not that kind of bump going on in here. It's a very, very, very fine and almost unseen bump. It's something you might actually just feel and not necessarily see on the Nintendo. So if you go down to your gamma at 0.01, now you're going to see, you can just barely see that. And I think that's even too much. I think that this needs to be more of a fine bump. So I'm going with 0.0005. And it's just super, super, super fine. The other thing when you're doing bump like this is that your roughness, you might not even need it anymore. So see, I turned the roughness down to 0, and the bump is creating roughness. And now when I zoom out, you can see what's going on here. Now there's too much reflection for my taste, so I'm going to take the index down. Because if you look over here at this Nintendo, it's more broad. And the other thing is I can turn on white and I can get a better look at this too. So I'm just getting a little bit of reflection here. A little bit of fall off, and if I want to, I can actually add some more roughness in. Because over here on this one, you're not going to see much reflection going on. Alright, so I've got that done, and now I want to apply a texture to the bottom of the Nintendo. So I'm going to copy and paste this, and now we did have a tag for the bottom of the Nintendo. I'm going to go find that. It was this one right here, and I'm going to rename that here bottom. And I'm going to copy this, or just drop this texture in. And selection tag is bottom. You can write it in, or you can just drag selection tag in. I'm going to, again, here I'm going to do cubic. Just because I'm not too familiar with this model, it's probably the easiest way to do this in this case. Now it looks the same. I'm going to go back to my regular sky object that I had here instead of white. Now on the bottom, it's super slick. So there's probably actually not any bump. And if you want to clear the bump, you just click the arrow and hit clear. There's a lot more reflection, so we're going to up the index. And we're going to take the roughness all the way down. You can see what's going on in here. Probably wouldn't be like mirrored reflections like that. So we're just going to bring it up a little bit. And the way you bring up a little bit is you hold down the Option or Alt key. And you can do like really minute values when you do that. So, all right, I've got that there. That's a little bit much on the reflection. I'm going to go down on the index a little bit. It is a white reflection though, so we'll keep the specular as is. We're not going to do a colored specular. And in the diffuse channel, now we're going to change this gray value and bring it down, and we're going to match that gray value that you see on the Nintendo. I still think that's too much. We might go into specular, bring down our specular color a little bit, and roughness, let's bring that up a little more. And of course we brought that down, and so now specular probably needs to come up a little bit more. So you can see how that works there. You got to kind of go back and forth, adjust one, adjust the other. So that is kind of how you do colors, how you do bump, how you do roughness, index. There's a couple other things in here, of course, that you can see that we probably won't use that much right now. Like film width and film index and stuff like that. That's probably ready for a more advanced tutorial, but I think there's still a little bit too much reflection going on in here though. I'm going to bring it down. I'm actually going to bring down specular and up the roughness a little bit more. I think that feels better. All right, so those are basics of doing colors, but of course, what if you want to do textures? Let's talk about how you would do a texture. The texture, like a bitmap texture. I'm going to turn off the Nintendo, which means I'm going to lose my game. And I'm going to turn on the cartridge. All right, now the cartridge itself had kind of a similar texture, but maybe not as shiny. So I'm just going to take that same base texture and put it on here. And probably just go to the index and just bring that down. Take the roughness like way up. All right, there we go. Now, right here, there is a tag that Matt put in here. If I could find it, it's the second tag. I've actually already renamed it artwork, so I could find it. This is where your artwork's going to go, and I'm going to show you exactly how we're going to do that. But first, we're going to build this texture on a cube so you get a better idea of how this works. So I'm going to move that to the side, make a cube, and I'm going to put it next to my cartridge. All right. I'm going to do a Cinema 4D Octane material, and I'm going to make it glossy, and I'm going to put it onto the cube. And this is just to show you how we're going to get this thing textured first before we worry about putting it on the cartridge itself. So I'm going to go to Diffuse, and I'm going to add the artwork that came with it, which I've modified a little bit. I'm going to do a Cinema 4D Octane texture, image texture. I'm going to click on it, and then I'm going to load the texture that I made, and it's called Title. I called it Title. All right. So let's look at this for a minute. This is supposed to be a label. It's supposed to be maybe a little bit glossy, but not much. So let's figure out what we want to do with it to make it look like it's kind of a semi-gloss papery texture before it goes on the cartridge. All right. First thing that I want to do is apply a bump, because we can't really judge roughness or anything until we have the bump. So let me add a noise to the bump. You can see now we're kind of getting a papery texture, but it's too big. We're going to up the omega and the octaves to Do we have something a little more papery? Maybe like this. We're going to bring down the amount of bump. Hey, ladybug. Whoa. Make a wish. Go over there. Okay. And I still think I'm not getting enough gloss. I'm going to back off this a little bit more in the gammas. So we have just a little bit of bump. We're still getting some reflection going on in here. You can see that there. And if I rotate around, this is what's nice about this particular HDR, is that you kind of have the bright spot here, some colors here, some more noisy, busy stuff going on in the background, so you can look at stuff from all angles and really judge, what it's going to look like. I like that. It feels kind of like semi-gloss paper to me. It has that bump feeling on it. And so what I would like to do with this is put on a title. And let's say I have a title that is a separate texture. You do a mixed texture here within the texture itself, or you could create a Cinema 4D Octane mixed material. That's the difference. One's a material, one's a texture. For this case, because we don't really have any base textures or anything like that on this object besides this one material, we're going to do this all within one texture. Now, this is really what I kind of had a hard time figuring out on my own when I started doing Octane. So if I go back to the diffuse layer and I go to Cinema 4D Octane and I say mix texture, it's going to take the texture and it's going to put it into a mixed texture. And you've got texture 1 and texture 2. And texture 1 is what we already had there. Texture 2, we're going to make a different texture to go on top of it. So we're going to do Cinema 4D Octane image texture. And if you click on it, I've made my own little texture here called texture 1 Photoshop file. And it says Brofoo. But you notice what's going on here. If I back in here, you can see that I have a float that is 0 to 1, and it's just a mix between these two materials. I don't want my mix to be a float because I'm not working that way. I want it to be this Brofoo on top of the original texture, which is texture 1. So if I click texture, I can do an alpha channel for this, and I can do it one of two ways. I can either click in here, Cinema 4D Octane, image texture, and load up Brofoo that way, or I could just click on texture 2, copy, and paste it right on to my amount. Now you notice when I paste onto my amount here, nothing happens. That's because you have to click on the amount, you have to tell it the type. It's not normal, it's an alpha. And boom, there it goes. It takes the alpha from Brofoo and it cuts out Brofoo, and what's beneath is texture 1. I know it's confusing because you figure texture 2 would be on the bottom because it's on the bottom here. It doesn't work that way. And no, you cannot add texture 3, texture 4, texture 5. If you wanted to add another texture on top of this, what you would have to do is get super meta, and you would have to click texture 2, Cinema 4D Octane, do another mix texture, click on that, and this is where you would add another one, and so on and so forth. I wish it would be just texture 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you can just layer that way. It doesn't work that way, unfortunately. So let me undo back. Now, if we had something like our base material, let's say, we're going to put that on the cube right here. We've got it UVW mapped. And we wanted to put, let's just say we wanted to put our Brofoo on here. The best way to go about doing that and keeping the base texture is to create a new material. I'm going to say Octane material. Diffuse, I'm going to use my texture, and we're going to do an image texture. Call that texture 1. Now, I'm going to drag that into the existing texture. Here's why. I'm going to delete that back that other texture. We don't need that. The reason that I'm dragging this into here is because I may or may not have this texture already set up the way that I want it to be, and I want the other texture to line up so that when I put these two together, their UVW mapping tag is exactly the same. I'm just going to create another Octane material. Diffuse, I'm going to put, I'm going to go down a completely different path here, so bear with me. I'm gonna do a red texture. And let's say that I wanted to put some noise in it. I'm going to do a Cinema 4D Octane Multiply. And in Multiply, you can add two of whatever you want and multiply them together. So I'm going to do an RGB spectrum, which is just a color. Bear with me here. I'm going to come back around to what we were talking about. And I'm going to do a Cinema 4D Octane Noise. It's going to multiply the two on top of each other. Now, back to what I was talking about earlier. If you have this noise set exactly how you want it and you want to combine it with something else, you have to make sure that your tags are aligned. So here is the wrong way to do it. If I have this base texture just how I want it, I'm doing UVW mapping 100%, 100%, everything's just totally default. But then I apply this Brograph on top of it, and I'm doing something weird, like spherical. Now, if I want to combine these two on top of each other, here's what I have to do. I need to create a shader that is an Octane mix material. And when I click on that and go to my mix material, I have material 1, material 2. My base texture is going to be that bump thing, the red bump thing I made. My top texture is going to be the Brograph texture. And the other thing that I need to do to complete the whole thing is to do a texture for my alpha. So this is an image texture up here, an Octane image texture. And the Octane image texture is going to be that same Brograph for the alpha. And so I'm just going to tell it alpha right here. Now, if I want to apply that texture to this cube, here are my options. I could just apply it to the cube. Well, that didn't work. Now my Brograph is in the wrong place. Or I could put it within this existing tag for where I have my Brograph right, but look what happens to the noise that I have in the diffuse channel. Now it's all screwed up. This is why you have to make sure that your tags are the same. So I'm going to delete all of these. I've got my base texture. And for orientation purposes, and to get this on here where I want it, I'm going to drag the Brograph by itself into that other tag so that I know it's going to be the same in the end. Hope that makes sense. Now, if I click on the image texture, this is where I want to make all my adjustments. So let's say I wanted to do something weird with it, like an UVW Transform. If I wanted to stretch it, if I wanted to do some sort of weird projection with it, like make it spherical, or I don't know, cylinder perspective box. You have different options. Mesh UV is basically UVW. I can do all that in here, and I'm changing it within the texture itself, within the material itself, and I'm not affecting the tag so that later on when I combine these tags, they line up. So let's say I want to mess with this a bit, make it real small. And then let's also say, here's another thing we need to learn. Let's also say, I don't want it to repeat. That's what wraparound is. You don't do your tiling in the tag itself like you usually do. You actually do it here under your border mode. You could say black, which we don't want because our alpha is based on, it's going to be based on white. So you're going to do white. There we go. There we go. Tiles one time, and we're good to go. So now I have that base texture. I have this other texture I made. Now if I go back to my mix texture where I have that base texture and the Brograph texture I made, and I just drag that into the existing UV. Now you're going to see that it doesn't look right. Why? That's because we need to match all that UVW stuff that we did on our original texture. So all you got to do is go to Diffuse, click the texture, copy it, go over here to your alpha channel that you have for combining these two together, paste it, and then go into here because you've pasted the normal. You got to change this back to alpha. It's pulling that alpha. But what it's done though is it's taken all of these XYZ scale translation coordinates and it's made them exactly the same as that original texture you had for Brograph because you just copied and pasted all the values. Something else that you can do if you want. If you're not worried about an image itself, for example, right now the red is coming through on Brograph because the color is in the Photoshop file itself. But let's say I wanted to do some other color and just use the alpha channel for Brograph. This is what I would do. I would create a new material, and let's just make something quick. Let's just make blue. Now in my mix material, if I make blue the top value, you've got your base texture of diffuse with the noise on it. Then you've got on top, you've got just a base blue texture right there. And then you have this mixed texture and it's just doing an alpha straight through. And the nice thing about this is if, let's say you have something with a lot of gold accents or something on it, you can have one base gold texture. You can have a bunch of different pieces with alpha channels on them, different textures, move them around, put them in different places. And then if you have to go back later, change your gold texture, let's say you want to make it glossy, you just change it and it will change all of the textures that are referencing that texture. So the next thing to learn about here is adding additional pieces. I think before we do that though, we should put our label on now that we know what we're doing. So this will kind of be like applying what we just learned. And so we have that selection tag that we already did. I'm going to find, I think Matt already had this kind of aligned in here, and we'll find the correct one. I don't remember which one it is. You know what? Let's just put them all in here until we find it. And none of them. Oh, of course. You can only have one texture per polygon. Keep that in mind. That's the lesson here, because we put that base texture on top of everything else. It's just sitting there. There we go. Of course. All right. Back to our label. Now, this is where you want to make your adjustments, and you want to make those adjustments inside of the texture itself. So in this texture, we had a mixed texture going. I'm going to clear this out by making an image texture. I'm going to reload that Brograph because we're going to kind of start over here. This is the Brograph without the actual text on it. I'm going to go in here. I'm going to do a UVW transform. And you can actually rotate one of these. Here we go. You can rotate your texture on the fly. You can see what's going on here. And you can scale it up and you can position it exactly how you want it. So I'm just going to get it close here. It's really cool that you can do this. Still not near big enough on Y. Notice my Y and my X translation are actually backwards because we did a rotation up here. So that's why that happens. Oh, it's confusing. All right. So there we go. So if I want to take my aligned texture of Brofu and I want to put it on top of here, what do I need to do? Well, first thing I'm going to do is create a new Octane material. I'm just going to kind of start over and forget about all this old stuff. And I'm going to do an image texture. I'm going to load up texture 1. And I'm going to create a mix material. My base texture is Octane material with the label. My top texture is going to be the text. Kind of combines them together. Now, if I want to look at my alignment, I can always just take this one and put it into the other texture just to see how it looks. Doesn't line up. It lines up how the other one was. But the great thing about this is you can just go into the texture. You can click from X for rotation all the way down to translation Z and just copy. And when you go over here, you go into the texture, UV Transform, paste, boom. It goes right in. So now these are exactly the same. That's the nice part. The only thing that we have to do is create the alpha channel. I'm going to put my mix material that has both of these in here. Restart my render there. You can see we have a float for the amount. We need to have an alpha. So we're going to go to click text. We're going to change this to a mix. I'm sorry, not a mix texture, to an image texture, and we're going to load up Brofu as a cut through for the alpha. And you can see the alpha is doing the same thing. Super simple again. All you do is just go to your UVW Transform and paste. You have to tell it the type is an alpha. It'll cut through. And there you go. Now, if you wanted to make, let's say you wanted the Brofu part to be like super glossy, you could just go into the text part itself only and go to your basic tab, make it a glossy texture, index, bring up that index. Look at that, it's getting super glossy. Super glossy. But then the base texture remains normal. And that's the difference, of course. If you wanted to mix two textures together, they're going to have all the same properties as far as if they're a flat texture or glossy texture, or what their bump is or what their index is. When you do these mixed materials and put them together this way, each one can have its own values as far as that's concerned. So the other thing that you also need to know about something like this is that if you wanted to add, let's say we're going to put Brofu is awesome onto the cartridge, and we have a cartridge that's gold. How are we going to put two separate textures that says Brofu over here and is awesome over here without them overriding each other? Because remember, you can only have one polygon, one material per polygon. So I'm going to do a gold texture. I'm going to create shader, Octane material. I want to make it glossy, and I'm going to turn the index down to 1. And I'm going to make the specular kind of an orangey gold. And same thing with my diffuse. I'm going to throw that on the base of my cartridge down here at the bottom. See, it's overriding there. There we go. Got to use those selection tags. And it's a bit yellow. Doesn't really matter. But all right, so now we're creating like a Zelda thing here. It's very flat. You can't see the reflectivity just because of the way it's facing. Because it's facing up to the sky. But if I wanted to put Brofu right here and is awesome at the bottom, how would I go about doing that? I'd probably make a mix material, right? So if I create Cinema 4D Octane material, and I'm going to load it up with diffuse channel image texture for Octane with my texture one that says Brofu. And I'm going to create, actually I'm going to put this into the gold so I can line this up. Let's, first of all, we're going to do this cubic because the UVW mapping is all over the place. I'm going to go in here and UVW Transform. Brofu, I don't want wraparound, I want white color. It's sideways. I'm going to rotate this on Z. I'm being pretty sloppy with it, but really doesn't matter that much right now. All that I really want to do is put Brofu into one place on the cartridge, which is right here. Now, if I create a mixed material and I put the gold as the base and I put the Brofu on top, I'm going to copy the diffuse texture from the Brofu and I'm going to paste it into my alpha for this mixed material, alpha. And then I'm going to put this mixed texture on here. Now we've got the gold, we've got Brofu on top, right? But what if I'm going to take this Brofu, copy and paste it, put it back in where the gold is. I'm going to change this to texture 2 that I have that says is awesome. And I'm going to set this one where I want it. I'm going to create another mixed material with the another mix material with the gold on the bottom, and I'm going to take the text and put it on top, and I'm going to take that text and copy it and make an alpha channel out of it here. And I've got is awesome. Now, if I wanted to say Brofu is awesome, not to mention you can see like other pieces of it coming through on the side. We don't want that either. If I wanted both of them, I would just copy this tag, right? And then I would put the other one on top. Well, how come I don't see them both? What's going on? Like if I take this off, I can see is awesome. Like if I switch the tags, I can see them that way. Well, the reason is because you can only have one material per poly. So all you got to do is select the poly where you want that one. I'm going to do a set selection. You might have to find it up here. I have mine shortcutted, but set selection, and I'm going to call that Brofu, which I'm going to apply to my Brofu mix material. And then you can see is awesome is in the back. And I'm going to just, even though we don't need it, I'm going to do the same thing for is awesome. I'm going to do a set selection and make a polygon selection for, call it is awesome. Apply that to this one. So we've got Brofu and is awesome. Now, of course, they're overlapping each other, so I'm actually going to have to take that and scale it on Y just a little bit. You can see what happens here. I'm moving the alpha. We're going to want the alpha and the texture itself to move. So once I kind of get this where I want it, all I got to do, copy that alpha, put it back in my base texture as normal. There we go. So we got both. Now we want the cartridge to have a base gold texture. I'll put that on the bottom. And there we go. We have one texture per poly. Let's see if I covered everything. We need to talk about glass now. Let's talk about glass, because there were some things that I really didn't understand about glass. If I create a cylinder, and it has absolutely nothing to do with Nintendo, but I'm going to make a glass cylinder, and I'm going to put it on top of my cartridge. Let's create an Octane material that is a regular material, and under the basic tab we're going to say specular. Now this is a little bit different. If we drag this into the cylinder, here's what we get. Now you have some of the same options here. You've got roughness, so you can make this kind of like a plasticky look. You've got the same bump stuff. You've got the amount of reflection, and of course you could do colored reflections if you want. You've got medium, and you've got transmission. Now transmission is how you select the color of the glass. So you can go like that, make a deep blue or something. Now, this is where we come back to Octane settings. There are limits to how far your refraction can go, and this is why we turned it up at the beginning. If your glossy depth and your specular depth are way down, this is what you're going to get on glass. Well, that's no fun. And you can see when I turn up the specular depth and the glossy depth, we get some of this back. It just depends on how much glass you have in your scene, because you don't want to jack them all the way up. Now, this is because we're using because we're using direct lighting and we're not using these more render intense path tracing or PMC. There's another thing that we have to take into consideration. If I turn off the cartridge, and I'm going to make a box, and I'm going to turn it into geometry by hitting C, and I'm going to delete the top here. All right, I've got shadows going on inside of this box, and if I were to take these cylinders and they had a regular texture on them, let's say gold, and then I put these cylinders inside of this box like this. I'm going to put them in here. I'm going to double up the cylinders too a little bit, or maybe even triple up to show you what happens here. If they're inside of this box, there's going to be shadows, right? So right now, there's quite a bit of shadows going on in here. And those shadows, let's say this cylinder right here on the top, if you were to take away this cylinder right now, what would you actually see on the bottom? You would see the dark shadow that's underneath, right there. Super, super dark, right? Now, when you're using direct lighting, here's the secret. It's so fast because it's not calculating in the same way that like the full path tracing would be. It's calculating basically, I guess just one point of light, in that if I am to take this glass and put it back onto the cylinder, it still has the shadow that would be there if there were a solid material on top. So what happens is you'll have a big group You may not see it. You may not see it when you create just regular glass and it's just in thin air, but you'll do like a big group or something and you'll have all this glass. And I'm going to change my medium back to, my transmission just back to clear so we can really see what's going on. And there's a lot of dark that goes on here. There's shadows that are there that probably wouldn't be there if you had a piece of glass there. I'm just going to bring the cylinders closer together. This will be easier for me if I'm just looking at this without that big render window there. I'm going to bring them really close together because what happens is when you have like a really close group of objects, you get more shadow. Like if these were just solid objects, for example. And to make this easier, I'm going to delete the textures off of here all together and just kind of group them into one big lump so it's easier to handle. Alright, so these are grouped together. Now, if we have a base texture, I'm just going to throw on the gray and both of these on the cube as well. Turn the cube back on. I'm going to make this cube small so we're really getting some shadows in here. It's all packed tight. Let's turn that render engine back on. Okay, see how dark it is inside the box right now? Now, if you were to put glass objects in here, it wouldn't be that dark because they're basically, clear. There's light going through them. But what happens is with direct lighting, the light only hits one time and the shadow is still there. So when I put glass in its place, look what happens. It's super, super dark. This will be especially obvious, I think, if I change to just pure white. So you can really see this here. It's really dark in there. You're not seeing any of the clear glass that you would expect to see if you were looking at glass inside of a box. So there's a fix for this, and it's called fake shadows. And under fake shadows, there's just one checkbox, and that's all it is. And what that does is when that light is coming down, it's hitting those cylinders, instead of creating a shadow because that object's there, it pretends that that object isn't there. And the light continues to go. That way, you can still use glass without doing your full path tracing. And you don't have those deep, dark shadows. And that was like a really big deal for me because I could not even figure that out. I had to dig way down into forums before I really figured out that that's what that is. So that is how you can kind of get around doing glass without having to go into a full path trace if you don't want to and you don't want to spend the time. So I'm going to delete the cube. I'm going to turn back on my sky. And we'll look at some other values here in the glass. We've got the roughness, which we talked about, the reflection. Bump is actually really nice to put on glass because you can get waves and stuff. It's basically what we talked about earlier. You can just do Cinema 4D Octane, noise, open it up. See, you have like a nice, really cool looking, you could do like ice or something with this, which is really cool. If you wanted to have a glass that's almost like perfect glass, but it's just has very, very slight abnormalities in it, you can do kind of a lower octave, lower omega, and then do UV transform and lower the X and Y. No, I'm sorry. Heighten the X and Y of the bump. So you just have like really slight variations in the glass. See, it's just slightly wavy. And let's see if there's anything else in glass we should talk about. We talked about transmission. Medium is probably something we should get into another time because that involves using fall off and stuff like that. And that's something that we'll probably get into if we talk about lighting. Let's see if I have anything else on my list. Fake shadows, glass, diffuse. I think we have gone through just about everything. Hopefully, this kind of unplanned tutorial will help you get your start in materials without having to dig through a manual. I certainly hope that's helpful. It was kind of an unplanned tutorial that I just decided to do on the fly. So I hope you enjoyed it. You can subscribe to our tutorials on YouTube. There's a link down here you can click on. It's all nicely organized, and you can go through and you can see our regular tutorials in general, or you can just look at Octane stuff on its own. Please add us on Facebook, and we post things in there, and on Twitter, and on Brograph.com. You can subscribe to our newsletter. It's available to subscribe to, and we send it out very rarely, but there's always some fun information in there about what we're up to. And we're also in the Reddit subreddit for Cinema 4D. That's /r/Cinema 4D. Hanging out in there, talking to people from time to time. And you can also get in touch with us through AOL keyword Brograph. Until next time, have a good one. Later, bros. It's pretty good, I guess.